All right, y'all, we are back. So this source keeps coming up for me, the LDHI library. Check that out if you're interested. I'm going to be looking into slavery before the transatlantic slave trade, but specifically on the continent of Africa and what that was like. Because apparently there were three other systems of slavery, not as big as transatlantic slavery, that predated transatlantic slavery. Um, and so, yeah. But I thought this was really interesting that they chose this photo for this particular article on their site, and it's Roman collared slaves in Smyrna, Turkey, 280. I'm telling y'all, a lot of this history, all history goes back to the biblical history and those records. It just is what it is. Um, and yeah, I think it's interesting too that they show Mansa Musa here, which, not to take away from the nobility, royalty, and just the fact that melanated people have accomplished some amazing things throughout time, since time immemorial, right? Which is the reason why a lot of people in our community seek to celebrate that and that history, and I get it. But at the end of the day, slave owner, slave seller, and I mean, if we want to approach things from that perspective, hey, let's celebrate Pharaoh too. But no, you know what I mean? So it's like, just because people are melanated, for me personally, that doesn't warrant some sort of celebration. But I understand in the historical record collectively why it is important to acknowledge, especially for people who tend to be very ignorant to the fact that it is possible and has been the reality prior to the existence of a white person, just to say it plainly, that black people, melanated people, have been ruling and doing great throughout time for a very long time, you know? So I understand it. But it's also kind of like, uh, eh. Anyway, let's read through this. So, various forms of slavery, servitude, and coerced human labor existed throughout the world before the development of the transatlantic slave trade in the 16th century, as historian David Eltis explains, which he, I believe, is like the founder of slavevoyages.org. I've also seen an interview with him where he's made mention of the fact that, and I can't remember which particular century he was referring to, but that the majority of the black population in the United States did not come from Africa. Which we know. A lot of, we know that because much of the peopling and populating was as like a direct result of the breeding on plantations and what have you. But I think his point was that many of them were natives, many more than we admit, or than much of the historical record that people tout about show. Anyway, and I'll try to find that clip. But he explains that almost all peoples have been both slaves and slave holders at some point in their histories. Still, earlier, of course, labor systems in the Atlantic world generally differed in terms of scale, legal status, and racial definitions and cruelty from the transatlantic chattel slavery system that developed and shaped New World societies from the 16th to the 19th centuries. Slavery in West and Central Africa. So slavery was prevalent in many West and Central African societies before and during the transatlantic slave trade. So just thinking logically, right? If that is true, and the reason why I'm passionate about proving this point is because I've been hearing way too much conversation and perspective that just completely refutes history, and it's just ridiculous to me. And it's just like, just use logic a little bit. Look, I'm not the smartest tool in the shed, all right? But I mean, come on. If this is an institution that has been a well running machine for centuries in your society, and there's proof and evidence of that. Again, three other systems that existed well before transatlantic slavery. And even prior to that, we can even look to Genesis, right? to see servitude coming into formation. Why wouldn't the people already benefiting from that type of dynamic seek to benefit more by any proposition from European nations who are like, hey, yo, let's make this thing great. Let's make this thing better than what it is. Let's make this thing bigger than what it is. And you can have a percentage. You know, like, why would they not take advantage of something like that? And not to get, me wrong, I understand that there may have been some, and they kind of discussed that here. There may have been some groups, small groups, like small villages that did not want to partake in that, which unfortunately many of them eventually succumbed to it. But for the most part, the powers that had be, yeah, I said it, the powers that had be at that time wanted all parts. They wanted all the smoke. They wanted all the smoke. Because this is what they was interested in. You know what I'm saying? Wealth. Resources. That has been the fuel that drives everything since time immemorial. So to even fix your mouth and mind, especially being someone from Africa, to say that Africans have not had part in selling people in slave trade, not just one but numerous, is like, me no comprende. Like, I don't understand. I don't get it. I don't. All right. When diverse African empires, small to medium-sized nations, or kinship groups came into conflict for various political and economic reasons, individuals. Oh, that's not a period. I thought that was a period. I'm like, why would they end a sentence? Like, never mind. Individuals from one African group regularly enslaved captives from another group because they viewed them as outsiders. The rules of these slaveholding societies could then exert power over these captives as prisoners of war for labor needs, to expand their kinship group or nation, influence and disseminate spiritual beliefs, or potentially to trade for economic gain. This is also why a lot of whatever traditions would have come over to the Americas from Africa is very convoluted, because they have a history of enslaving, right, people different from themselves for the purposes of expanding their kinship. So intermingling and intermixing. So a lot of those spiritual beliefs or whatever weren't like original themselves. Do y'all get what I'm trying to say? Y'all get what I'm trying to say? Because I think there's this effort to try to point to one specific culture, one specific nation, or one specific place in Africa, to where all people from that diaspora feel as though they can stake claim to that legacy or to that history, when it's like, you may not have even come from the place where these things originated, and the things that originated there were pulling in elements from things prior to that were not once a part of the culture. So it's like, yo, oh, what I do? What? Oh, I clicked on this. Y'all get what I'm saying? Anyway, those shared African ethnic identities such as Yoruba and Mandinka may have been influential in this context. The concept of a unified Black racial identity or of individual freedoms and labor rights were not yet meaningful. Right. I don't think that there's ever been a unified Black racial identity on the continent, because how can there be? And the thing is, like, that's something that a lot of people are looking for. Let's all just unite and be one. And I know that's like a lot of what drove the Pan-Africanist movement, which I've, never been, neither has my family ever been like okay with that. It's like, because we understood it was an agenda at the end of the day. It's like, listen, God literally designed people different. He literally made us to be different. We are different people. Out of one woman, Jacob and Esau, came two different people phenotypically and different in other ways, right? That's not a bad thing. It just is what it is. And us trying so hard to unite and be one is the problem. There's a difference between recognizing, respecting, honoring, and appreciating differences in a way that can inform a system that is based on justice and peace and equity. And then striving to be one and make everything one to the point that it becomes perverted. Do y'all get what I'm saying? I don't really want to take it much further than that, though I could, but it's getting out of hand. It really is. There will never be a unified black racial identity. Right? Partly because this whole idea of race anyway is a mess in and of itself. Okay? But at the end of the day, this does not define particular people. This term alone, right? Ethnic groups do that. Now, if this term happens to be within the description of your particular ethnic group, then okay, that's understandable. But even within that particular term, we understand the confines around this, the usage of this word, specifically being a denotion of race or complexion in some cases, because even within the black race, you have varying complexions, right? But it's like, I understand people who are like, I just love everything and everyone black. Like, I get where you're coming from. But at the end of the day, I don't agree. And no, it don't matter whether or not my opinion doesn't matter. I understand that. But this is my channel and I'm going to share my opinion. And my opinion is that I don't agree. And I don't think that when people say that, they're really understanding what they're saying. Because would you say that if you knew that it was black people who enslaved your people, who happened to also be black? Would you say that if you knew that it was black people who were causing harm to other black people? So it's like this idea that, like, yes, we should be in support of the underdog for sure, right? The people that are being, is disenfranchised a good word to put there? Or just taken advantage of and exploited? Absolutely. But if those people happen to be wolves in sheep clothing, then I don't know. We might have to change our perspective. You know? And it gets deep because at the end of the day, even among the children of the Most High God, there is division and there are enemies. Many of them are enemies one to another, specifically Jacob, Levi, and Benjamin. And there will be wars and there will be infighting and conflict, and there has throughout time. And so it's just like this idea of uniting is not something that is going to ever happen. And I just think trying to accomplish that is futile. It really is. Instead, I think we should be focused on replacing the supremacist system that exists right now with a system of justice. And a part of that means acknowledging that we are different and we have differences, and respecting that and setting healthy boundaries around that and around our cultures. Anyway, West and Central African elites and royalty from slave-holding societies even relied on their kinship group, ranging from family members to slaves, to secure and maintain their wealth and status. By controlling the rights of their kinship group, Western and Central African elites owned the products of their labor. In contrast, before the transatlantic slave trade, Western European elites focused on owning land as private property to secure their wealth. These elites held rights to the products produced on their land through various labor systems rather than owning the laborers as chattel property. It don't matter. They eventually went on to enact that type of system, and it was horrendous. In contrast, land in rural Western and Central African regions outside of densely populated or riverine areas was often open to cultivation rather than divided into individual land holdings, so controlling labor was a greater priority. The end result in both regional systems was that elites controlled the profits generated from products cultivated through laborers and land. The different emphasis on what or whom they own to guarantee rights over these profits shaped the role of slavery in these regions before the transatlantic trade. So as you see, there's been a ongoing relationship with these people, which again, Canaan, Ham, some of their descendants, and Esau. Since I gotta pull up those scriptures and find the precepts so y'all know what the heck I'm talking about, because it's been happening for a minute. All right, let me see here. Yeah, but anyway, I mean, this is again a good, reputable resource that proves that not only was Africa and the many nation states and the people on the continent and the powers on the continent integral and pioneering in the transatlantic slave trade, but for a very long time prior to that, they had systems of slavery and servitude set up in their nations, in their villages, in their communities. Like, it was literally a part of their culture. And so why would we think that if they view their family and kinship in that light as being worthy of slavery and this kind of servitude, and certainly prisoners of war, like, why do we think that they would not sell us for a greater reward to people they had already been, in many ways, building a relationship with? Like, come on. You know? All right, so... Huh. Yeah, I'm going to start reading into this. But yeah, I mean, one thing that really led, and may she rest in peace and power, my mother, but her discovery in my teen years to really want to understand, like, who really were we? Where do we come from? Why does our history always seem to start with and end with slavery? Why do we always seem to be learning more about the Holocaust and these other people as opposed to our story when we've been so integral to the building of this nation? Right? These are questions that I remember her asking me and other people. And she was like, I know we used to be kings and queens and royalty. Like, what is going on? And so she looked back and went through Egyptology and all this stuff and realized, like, nah, that ain't our history either. Like, no, it's something deeper. It's something deeper. A lot of what fueled that for her is because of the racism that she and many others that she saw experienced and encountered. My mom was born in the 60s. And it's just like, she could not rationalize or understand the hatred and the vitriol that existed and the history that we knew at that time. A lot of this is, kind of like new discovery to me, because unfortunately a lot of it has been hidden. And it's crazy because it's like every 10 or 20 years it'll resurface and then go back into the archives, resurface and then go back into the archive. It's weird how it cycles like that, but I guess it's because of the generations and the technological changes and other things. But yeah, and I just remember that hurting her spirit a lot, And so my all of my life, basically my developmental years of my life, has been centered around this sort of quest for uncovering truth, literally. And not just secular truth and our history, but also like biblical truth and understanding who we are. Because she, it was also like hurtful to her to grow up in this belief or understanding that she was like goyim, or this cattle, or like a Gentile. And the more that you actually go into the Bible as opposed to Christianity and look into who these people are, it's like, hold on, because these traits and characteristics and these blessings and curses, and hold on, this is very indicative of a particular kind of people, and it ain't the people that they saying is who is the chosen. So what's going on, And so yeah, that is kind of what has influenced, again, since for me the age of 14, really honestly 13, because I was baptized at 14, influenced a lot of this for me. And yeah, it's been a wild ride ever since, y'all. Ever since. But yeah, I mean, we're literally living in a time where history is in the making. I mean, it's always in the making, but there's like a new renaissance is happening. And at the same time, there's so much effort to erase, revise, sanitize, hide the truth. And it's just wild. And you got to ask yourself, like, why though? That was my point. All of her discovering, her being moved by a lot of her pain and hurt and the discrimination and all the things, and that she witnessed from others all throughout her life, fueled her desire to want to understand our story outside of this framework of something that was so oppressive and depressive. And she just couldn't wrap her mind around, like, why is this happening to us? And I remember her saying all the time, it's not just because of the color of our skin. It can't just be that simple. That don't make no sense. Like, it can't just be. I mean, when you think about the cruelty, eating people, putting their teeth in your mouth as your own. Like, I mean, the list goes on. Hanging and burning, bombing. Like, when you think about the cruelty pressed upon our people, many melanated people, but again, specifically in chattel slavery, when you think about that, and you're telling me that the reason is simply because of the color of my skin? No. Or just like the jealousy behind that? No. It's got to be deeper. Why? Because there were people who were way more melanated, way more beautifully melanated, in many cases, who were also responsible. So whatever spirit that was fueling this, was something so much deeper than just the color of my skin. Come on now. That's a silly thing to think. I'm sorry, it is. For millennia? What? Nah, it's way more complex and deeper than that. And at the end of the day, it is spiritual. And that's what we have to understand. The principalities and powers that be, baby, exist in a whole other realm. In the physical, too. But this is so much deeper than most people understand. And it's weird to me because it's like we acknowledge spiritual elements within yoga, within like all of these different practices and modalities in health and wellness, right? Which even in that, I've got my own perspectives and viewpoints, and there are certain things that I do not promote within the work that I do because I understand, and I've done the research in history, especially during my time at the American College of Healthcare Sciences when studying herbalism, where a lot of these things originate from, which is why I don't choose to employ a lot of them. I prefer Pilates over yoga because I know the origins of that and what those poses mean and whatever. But it's something that's gaining more traction and becoming very popular, especially among our people. And it's like, you think about meditation and some of these different practices, and it's like, we can acknowledge, and trust me, those who understand the origins definitely acknowledge and employ a lot of those spirits and what have you tied to those systems, because they're rooted in spiritualistic systems and religious belief systems, paganism. We can acknowledge that, but for some reason, even, within our community, we can acknowledge hoodoo, we can acknowledge ancestral energy and all these things, but it's like for some reason we can't acknowledge the creator of us all, the creator of everything, and demonic spirits and how they move and operate, right? And the power that they have and influence that they have. And so it's like, yeah, this, you cannot escape it. I don't care if you're a freaking atheist who only believes in certain sciences, which they themselves, many being esoteric in nature, like also acknowledge this sort of otherworldly influence, just with different terminology. Because all of that comes from, and we'll read about that in the book of Enoch, other entities, spiritual entities. You cannot escape it. And so, yeah, there's definitely spirits, plural, behind this type of systemic behavior and violence. In special kinds, not special in the good way, for this in particular. And until we understand the origin of this stuff, why it has happened, and where we fit in that, true healing for our people ain't never finna happen. I'm so sorry. It's not. Anyway, y'all, I done went on a whole diatribe. Lord. But hopefully those who feel me, those who hear me, right? I'm not out here trying to please and be everybody's cup of tea. I'm for who I'm for, okay? And if you understand, if you get it, like, comment, subscribe, share. Y'all be blessed.